What's up, everybody? This is Alex Christoforou with the Duran, and I have with me editor-in-chief of the Duran, Alexander Mercouris. And today we're going to be talking about Mueller's indictment of GRU officials, Russian GRU officials. Alexander, we had some big news over the weekend. And it coincides with Trump's meeting in Helsinki with Putin on the 16th. And we'll get into the coincidence of the timing of this news. And the big news was that Robert Mueller, the special counsel for the Trump-Russia collusion narrative, investigation, I call it a narrative, indicted 12 Russian GRU officials. Real quickly, before we get into the nuts and bolts of this story, explain to our viewers what a GRU official is.
Right. GRU is the military intelligence service of the Russian military. If you've heard of various Russian intelligence organizations, there used to be the KGB, and now organizations like the FSB and the SVR. These are civilian intelligence agencies. The GRU is military intelligence. It is part of the Russian Ministry of Defense. The people who work in it are serving as soldiers. The nearest US equivalent is the Defense Intelligence Agency. Now, the 12 people whom Mueller has indicted are Russian military officers. He says that they are GRU officials. Of course, we don't know that. We'd have no way of knowing whether they are GRU officials or not, other than what he says about them.
Okay, so Mueller's indicted these 12 individuals. What does this mean as far as his ability to exercise on these indictments? Can he really do anything about it, or is this just purely for show, just on paper, legally?
Right.
Can something be done?
It is purely for show.
Okay.
And I mean, first of all, the first thing to say is there is absolutely no way that that the Russian authorities are going to send these people, especially if they're intelligence officers, to the United States to stand trial there. I mean, that simply isn't going to happen. The second thing to say is that one person who would be horrified if that did happen is Robert Mueller himself. Because if you look at the indictment, he provides no evidence at all to back the allegations he is making against these people, which leads one to suspect that the entire case against them is intelligence-based. If it is intelligence-based and the information is classified, that information cannot be produced as evidence in court, and without that evidence, it doesn't seem possible to convict these people. So I can't imagine that Mueller has any expectation that these people will come to the United States, and I don't expect that he wants them there. And this indictment, as I said, was purely published for declaratory purposes, for show, in other words.
Do you believe that these indictments were published or were prodded? They prodded Mueller, the deep state prodded Mueller to act and indict someone Russian, someone or something Russian, in order to sabotage Trump's meeting with Putin on the 16th, or to add additional pressure, say, to the meeting with Putin?
Well, let's look at the date. 3 days away from the meeting between Putin and Trump, and this indictment magically appears. And what happens is followed by demands from all sorts of people that Trump call off the summit with Putin, or if he's going to press on with the summit with Putin, that he's going to discuss this thing, this indictment, and apparently nothing else. Obviously, it's a wrecking exercise for the summit. I mean, there's no other explanation for it. Supposedly, Mueller has had this indictment in his pocket for 4 months. So, of course, the timing is as it appears. I'm going to add something else. The timing is also, in my opinion, clearly intended to take some of the pressure off the Justice Department. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who's coming under a great deal of pressure, Mueller himself, who's failing to come up with the goods on the collusion side of the story, and, of course, Peter Strzok, who is the FBI officer who's just given a very interesting testimony to Congress, which we will be discussing shortly, I think, in another program.
Right.
So, I mean, the timing of all of this is very suspicious, and obviously so.
Okay, before we go delve deeper into the Mueller indictment, you mentioned Rosenstein, and I want your comments on some news that is coming out, that Rosenstein, that papers are being drawn up by the GOP to impeach Rosenstein. Now, my question is, do you lend any credence to these rumors that the GOP may be moving to impeach Rosenstein, number one? And number two, which I've asked you this question many, many times before, Rod Rosenstein has a boss. His name is Jeff Sessions. Where is he in all of this?
Right. To answer your first question, I think that there is every possibility that the GOP is indeed moving to impeach Rosenstein. Can I just say two things? Firstly, Rosenstein has stonewalled repeated requests from Congress, including congressional subpoenas, to produce evidence and documents about the FBI investigation into the collusion claims. And that is a serious matter. So sooner or later, inevitably, Congress, or at least the Republican Party in Congress, were going to act, and they are now doing so. So I don't find that at all surprising. I think it is highly likely that's going to happen. Whether this impeachment will succeed is another matter, but I am not at all surprised it's taking place. That's the first thing. As to what Jeff Sessions is doing, I think, and we've discussed this before, Jeff Sessions' whole strategy has been to lie low, protect the Department of Justice as far as he can, and not do what I think Donald Trump expected him to do, which is to exercise fully the office of Attorney General of the United States by getting control of this thing. I think Sessions calculates that doing so would rush him into various problems with the officials in the Justice Department, and I'm afraid it seems he doesn't want to do that.
Yeah, I think Jeff Sessions is an establishment guy. Now, if you want to call Jeff Sessions a deep state guy because he is so entrenched in the establishment, I think that could be a fair assessment to make of Jeff Sessions. So there could be a lot of conflicts of interest here with Sessions and Rosenstein, and Sessions and Trump, and each one, pulling at Sessions and what he should do. So I think you're right. Sessions probably has decided to just remove himself completely from the equation here, which is interesting. Now I want to go back to the Mueller indictment of these 12 GRU officials. Now, in the indictment, Mueller and Rosenstein, because they're working hand in hand on these indictments, the DOJ and the FBI, they essentially admit that there was no American involved in this collusion, in this hacking of the DNC servers, in the distribution of the Podesta emails to WikiLeaks. What is this admission that there was no American hands involved in this, that this didn't influence, they also admitted that it didn't influence the outcome of the elections in no way, not one vote could have been influenced by the dissemination of these documents from the Podesta emails and from the DNC. What does this say about the entire Trump-Russia collusion?
I think you have hit on the single most important thing about the indictment. Now, can I just say something? I think that this is the most important indictment in some respects that Mueller has published, because what it shows is that 2 years after this investigation began, there is no evidence whatsoever that Mueller has been able to find of any connection between the Russians and the Trump campaign to spread this information, these emails, to the media in the way that the collusion conspiracy theory requires them to have done. And it is the collusion conspiracy theory that Mueller is supposed to be investigating. So, if there is no collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians to publish these emails, what is Mueller still investigating? That, for me, is the question.
Now, I'm going to read to you two tweets that Trump sent out in succession after he heard about the indictment of the 12 Russian GRU officials. And I want you to give me your assessment of these tweets. The first tweet he sent out was, "The stories you heard about the 12 Russians yesterday took place during the Obama administration. not the Trump administration. Why didn't they do something about it, especially when it was reported that President Obama was informed by the FBI in September, before the election, question mark. And the second tweet, it's very short, but it's relevant. Where is the DNC server, and why didn't the FBI take possession of it, question mark. Deep state, question mark. Alexander, what do you make of these tweets that Trump sent out?
Well, they are typical Donald Trump, which is to say they are very clever and they are very much to the point. Let's take the first one first. What Donald Trump is saying is absolutely factually correct. As I said in my previous answer, what the indictment says, what Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, says, is that there was no involvement by anybody in Donald Trump's campaign or by any other American in these hacks. Donald Trump was not president of the United States when these hacks are supposed to have happened. So what does this have to do with him? Why is he constantly being fingered in this matter when he was not responsible for the security of the United States at the time? He was not involved, and none of his people were involved in what happened. And he was in no position to prevent it or to protest about it. I think this is absolutely relevant. The Democrats are making some extraordinary claim that these hacks supposedly began at the time when Trump was goading the Russians to produce Clinton's emails. But I mean, this is just nonsense, frankly. And I think Trump is absolutely right to point out that if the Mueller investigation is about him, which it clearly is, then this is another indictment that isn't anything to do with him and which must therefore be considered a misfire. Turning to the second tweet, I think it gets even more interesting in some ways, because what Donald Trump is saying, what an awful lot of people have been saying, is that all this criminal activity is supposed to have happened. The FBI is supposed to be the agency that investigates criminal activity, yet it didn't investigate the alleged criminal activity which is supposed to have happened. It didn't look at the servers. It didn't actually go into the DNC and to Podesta's offices and look at their computers and find out whether what was supposed to have happened actually did happen. So the result is that we now have an indictment that is based entirely on intelligence information, which cannot be produced in court and which cannot therefore be cited in any case in court which can possibly lead to any sort of conviction. So I'm afraid Donald Trump is right on both counts. And as I said, once again, he has shown that he has much more understanding of these issues than most people do.
You mentioned that a lot of and this is a pretty detailed indictment that's been issued, but you've mentioned that a lot of the case is built on two pillars, I would say. One is a DNC server that the FBI never saw. And the other is the fact that they're getting a lot of these details of this GRU hacking, these GRU officials hacking the DNC and the Podesta emails from intelligence experts, which we'll never find out who they are and what methods they used and what's going on, because it'll never, see the light of day in a court. And so what you're also seeing is you're seeing a lot of Democrats and Republicans and Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN, they're all coming to an agreement, however, that because of the detail of this indictment, we know one thing. And I heard this quote on Fox, and I counted it 4 times during the Tucker Carlson show the other night. Russia is the enemy. Russia is the enemy. Do you think this is where this is all leading to? That maybe there's some grand bargain that's about, maybe it's not so much to sabotage Trump, but maybe there's some grand bargain where Trump will walk away from the Putin summit, will press Putin, and then say, Russia refuses to agree with us on, the detail of this evidence. And so the Democrats and Republicans can come together and rally around a common enemy, which is Russia. I mean, I'm just, my point on this, maybe I'm rambling a little too much. My point on this is that this seems to me another track of this indictment could be to signal to Trump, look, let's focus on the common enemy and let's kind of move away from your collusion with Russia, that narrative, and then focus on the common enemy, which is Russia.
Yeah. Right. Can I just say that I think actually all your points are very much to the point and they're very pertinent. Let me take, first of all, the first point, which is about the immense detail in this indictment. Now, I've seen these things many times in my life, and I'm going to make a very general point, which is that the more detailed accounts are, the more often they are likely to be untrue. It is very easy to fool people into thinking that something is true by piling in lots and lots of detail in it and giving the impression that things have been proved when they have not. Now, I am not saying that this story as set out in the indictment is untrue. I don't have that information. I don't think we will ever see that that information. So I cannot say, but one should not assume that because something is being said in great detail and at great length, and because certain names have been provided, that makes this all true. Let me remind you yet again, and let me remind our viewers yet again, of the fundamental principle that people are innocent until they are proved guilty. And that applies as much to GRU officers as it does to everyone else. So we mustn't take this indictment as necessarily true. But I think you are right, because if you are looking at the drift, not just of this indictment, but of various congressional reports that have issued out of the House Intelligence Committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee, we recently talked about the report of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Their entire drift is to say, yes, there was a Russian hack. Yes, the Russians did do this terrible thing. But no, there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians. And that, in a way, gives both sides in this hugely polarized discussion that we have had in the United States something that they can take away with. The intelligence community is able to say, yes, the United States was brought under attack from the Russians. We can't prove it. We've never proved it in any court. But here we have an indictment which says it, which gives the names of all the bad people who did it, which gives all the information about the sort of people who did it and how they did it. And we insist that that is true. So that gives the intelligence community something, and it gives some of the Democrats and some of the media something. And at the same time, we have for the Republicans and for Trump and for people who support Trump, the other side, which is actually that there was no collusion between Donald Trump and the Russians, and that there is no evidence of any wrongdoing, either on his part or on the part of his campaign. So everybody can move forward. They can all say, well, the Russians did something very bad, but we Americans are fine. We all are able to come together with this thing. It's been proved that no American did any wrong. The Russians did lots of wrong. They are our enemy. They are the bad people. But on the strength of that, without actually proving anything, we can put this bad thing behind us. And I'm afraid I think that is exactly where this thing is moving to.
Yeah, I mean, I recognize in life when they're trying to make a scapegoat out of someone or something. And to me, it seems that the deep state is coming together with the establishment and maybe Trump as well to make a scapegoat of Russia. And I'm not saying Trump personally, Trump, maybe his administration, maybe some people in his administration who can influence him before he meets Putin. And so my final question is, Schumer sent a tweet after this indictment, and he said, and I'll summarize what he said. He said that Trump shouldn't be meeting with Putin until Russia admits that it meddled in the election and that it's not going to meddle in the 2018 election. And of course, you have a lot of Democrats and Republicans also saying Trump should either not go to the summit or he should walk out if Putin doesn't admit that Russia meddled in the U.S. elections. What do you, if you had to make a prediction as to how Trump is going to deal with Putin and how Putin is going to deal with Trump, given this well-timed indictment, what would you say that prediction would be?
Well, I think you put your finger on it when you said that this is what the Republicans of the deep state are up to, which is to say they're going to create the scapegoat, this Russian scarecrow, which caused all these bad things, but give Americans a clean bill of health. But Donald Trump himself may not be minded to do that. I'm going to go even further than that. I think that Donald Trump knows exactly what is going on, and he has his own particular policy, which he has been pushing now for a very long time, since well before he became the Republican Party's candidate for the presidency of the United States. And that is that he wants to do some sort of deal with the Russians. And I don't think he's going to let himself be sidetracked by this in any way at all. I think he's going to go ahead with his meeting with Putin. He's going to say to Putin all the things he was always intending to say, which are not really concerned, in my opinion, with Russiagate, which I don't think, frankly, he takes at all seriously as an issue in terms of relations with Russia. And I think he's just going to move forward with that agenda. And I think he's going to say to the Republicans and to the Democrats and to the deep state in the United States, well, if this is what you need to do to get yourselves sorted out and to move on from this, well, that's up to you. But don't expect it in any way to change my policies. One of the remarkable things about this president is the extraordinary consistency of purpose he has shown through enormous pressure that he has come under since he's been elected in doing those things which he wants to do. He doesn't let himself be sidetracked or outmaneuvered in political games. He just presses on. And interestingly enough, the momentum in politics in the United States is increasingly swinging behind him. So I think personally that we will see in a few days a meeting between Putin and Trump. I think they will brush this thing aside, they will swat it away like a fly, and the two men will come to whatever understanding they are able to between them, based on their own agendas and their own intentions. And Mueller's maneuvers and Rosenstein's maneuvers and Mr. Schumer's wishes in the United States and those of all the other people are going to have no effect on this at all.
But before we close out the discussion, real quick, Alexander, given the fact that Rosenstein and Mueller have essentially admitted with this indictment that there were no Americans involved, even if there was a GRU fingerprint on the hack, say there is a clear admission that there were no Americans involved. Does this wrap up the Mueller investigation?
I think we are coming to the end, and I really do think we're coming to the end now. I mean, I've thought this for a while now, but I think that with this particular indictment, Mueller has played his strongest card. I mean, he's been holding it back for months, and I think he's been drilling really hard to try to get people like Manafort and perhaps Michael Cohen, that's Donald Trump's lawyer, and perhaps before that Michael Flynn, Donald Trump's national security advisor, to come forward and to say to him, well, you know, all these things there was some kind of contact with the Russians. And I think he's now understood that isn't going to happen. And let us be very clear. I don't think the American people care very much about what the Russians did or didn't do. In the election with the Democratic National Committee and the hacking of the computers. I mean, I think even Democrats actually don't really care very much about that, because the Russians have been so demonized by now that I think most Americans believe the Russians are capable of anything. And besides, people follow spy stories and they watch films and they know the sort of things that great powers do. And I don't think they're shocked by it. I think a lot of people were very concerned at one time that there was some kind of connection between Donald Trump and the Russians. I think that now that there is an admission that there is no connection between Donald Trump and the Russians, that there was no kind of collusion between Donald Trump and the Russians, what is Mueller still investigating? What is this investigation for? What is it looking for? Why is it continuing? I think these questions, and we've discussed them in previous programs that we've made together, I think these questions, which people like Trey Gowdy and Bill Jordan and all the others, and Nunes and many people outside Congress, what they have been asking, they're going to be asking it even more now. They're going to be saying to Rosenstein when he appears again before Congress, they're going to be saying it to Mueller's people. What are you looking for? What are you still investigating? All right, you may have shown to our satisfaction that the Russians were up to no good, but what is the investigation of the United States President and his advisors and his officials? What is that about? And I think that Rosenstein and Mueller are very fast going to run out of answers because they don't have any answers. And I think the pressure, as a result of this indictment, once the dust has settled, to close this thing down so that the United States can move on, will grow. And at the end of it, I predict that Donald Trump will come out vindicated and in a stronger position than he was before.
I agree with that, and I think a lot of our viewers, Alexander, and I want you to touch on this very briefly as well before we finish. I think a lot of our viewers also understand that most likely it wasn't GRU officials that hacked the DNC server or the Podesta emails. There's been great coverage on this. It was probably an inside job. The Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, Ray McGovern, Bill Binney, Consortium News has covered this a lot, that this was most likely done with a thumb drive, you know, judging by the speeds of the download. And so I think a lot of our viewers also understand that whatever Rosenstein and Mueller are pushing as far as, 12 Russians somewhere in Moscow or St. Petersburg hacking the DNC server is really doesn't really hold a lot of water. And my impression is that a lot of people understand that by now, given the length of time that we've had to address this whole investigation.
Well, what I would say about that is, first of all, that if the United States, if the intelligence community had come out with something like what Mueller has just come up with, and provided the names of all these people 1.5 years ago, when that famous January 2017 report from the intelligence community was released, I think people would have been willing to believe it. I think 1.5 years later, 2 years after this hack supposedly took place, I think skepticism has grown to such a degree that I'm sure you're right about what you've just said. I'm sure an awful lot of people have now developed their doubts, and those doubts are simply not going to go away. Especially as, and I come back to what I said before, Mueller is never going to prove this case in court. He knows that. If he has issued an indictment which even on its face he cannot prove in court, because doing so would mean producing intelligence obtained evidence, which he is never going to do. He never has any intention of doing that, and if you can't prove something in court, then it's not proved. So I'm afraid you're absolutely right. We're never going to see the evidence here. We're never going to get past this, and I think people's skepticism will remain, and it will never change. I would add one other little point, which is, of course, WikiLeaks themselves and Julian Assange have consistently denied that they got this information from the Russians. And as we talked about in an earlier program, when the FBI and people in the United States were given the opportunity to speak to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks about this, James Comey prevented that happening.
Right. It's just, I think definitely to sum it up in my mind, this indictment was less of a legal maneuver and more of a political and a geopolitical maneuver by Mueller and Rosenstein. Would that be a correct?
That's absolutely right. I mean, that is exactly what it was. If you issue an indictment which cannot be proved in court, then that is not really an indictment. It is a declaration. It is, dare I say it, a public relations exercise. And that is how we should see this thing.
Great. That's a great way to close it out and to summarize it, Alexander. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below. Also, click on that notifications bell to get notifications every time we push out a new video. And remember, visit the Duran shop. Here's a shirt. Pick up a shirt. Help support the Duran. Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Thank you very much for an excellent analysis on the Mueller indictments of the 12 GRU Russian officials. Guys, until next time, take care.